My father-in-law said I wasn't smart enough to do my homework, so I opened my own law firm and hired him to work for me. My father-in-law told my kids I wasn't smart enough to teach them without help. So, I enrolled in law school. He showed up later, working in the firm I now own. You should have seen his face. The words hit me like a knife as I stood frozen outside my son's bedroom door. But Grandpa Henry says Mom isn't smart enough to help with homework anyway, my 14-year-old, Ethan, said. His voice carried into the hallway, followed by my 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, agreeing. I'm Melissa, and until that moment, I thought I was doing okay as a mother. Sure, I never finished college. Instead, I chose to work and support my husband, Eric, through medical school while raising our kids. But I've always been there, cooking, cleaning, helping with projects, attending every game and recital. Yet, somehow, my father-in-law had convinced my children I was stupid. Your mother means well, dear, Henry had told Sophie just the other day at dinner, patting her hand condescendingly. But perhaps she should call me when she needs help with algebra. We wouldn't want her grades to slip, now would we? I gripped my fork tighter, my smile frozen in place while Eric suddenly found his mashed potatoes very interesting. He never stood up to his father. Never. Actually, I helped Sophie with her last math test, I said. She got an A. Henry chuckled, that grating, dismissive chuckle that made my skin crawl. Oh, sweetheart, anyone can help check answers on a worksheet. I'm talking about real academic help. Now, hearing my children echo his words, something inside me snapped. I pushed open the bedroom door. Is that what you really think? Both kids jumped. Ethan flushed red but lifted his chin defiantly. Well, you didn't even finish college, Mom, he pointed out. And you always ask Dad to explain the news articles to you. I walked into the room and sat on Ethan's bed. Do you know why I never finished college? They shook their heads. Because I chose to support your father through medical school. Someone had to pay the bills. Someone had to take care of you too. That was my choice. It doesn't make me stupid. But Grandpa Henry says. Grandpa Henry doesn't know everything, I said sharply, then softened my tone. Did you know I had a full scholarship to Stanford before I met your father? Their eyes widened. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Sophie asked. Because I never regretted my choice to put our family first, I said. But maybe. I stood, a plan forming in my mind. Maybe it's time for some changes around here. That evening, I confronted Eric in our bedroom. Your father has to stop undermining me in front of the kids. He sighed, loosening his tie. He means well, Melissa. Does he? Because today, our kids were talking about how I'm too stupid to help them. Is that meaning well? He's just old-fashioned. He believes I'm beneath you because I'm a housewife. And now our kids believe it, too. Tears threatened, but I pushed them back. When was the last time you defended me to him? His silence was answer enough. I'm going back to school, I announced. Eric's head snapped up. What? School? Now? Not just school. Law school. The idea had been growing all afternoon. And now, saying it aloud, it felt right. Melissa, that's years of intense study. The LSAT alone. Are you saying I can't do it? He backpedaled. No, of course not. It's a big commitment. What about the kids? The kids need to see their mother as someone worthy of respect, I said. Right now, thanks to your father, they don't. I walked to the door, then turned back. I'm doing this, Eric. Either support me or get out of my way. That night, I lay awake, planning. Tomorrow, I'd call my best friend, Naomi. She'd help me figure out the first steps. I needed to study for the LSAT research schools and figure out financing. The road ahead looked daunting, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard my kids' voices. Mom's not smart enough. Well, Henry Clark, just watch me prove you wrong. I'm done being the quiet, accommodating daughter-in-law. You want to talk about intelligence? Let's see how you handle it when I'm the one with the law degree. 3 years later, I stood in my cap and gown as the law school dean announced. Congratulations to our graduating class. In the audience, Eric beamed, while Ethan and Sophie held up a homemade banner, Go, MOM. Notably absent? Henry. He developed a convenient backache this morning. After the ceremony, Naomi tackled me in a hug. You did it. And with honors. Take that, Henry, she whispered. Speaking of Henry. Eric muttered, nodding toward the entrance. There he stood, stiff in an ill-fitting suit, his usual polished appearance dulled by stress. Melissa, he greeted, forcing a smile. I suppose congratulations are in order. You suppose? I raised an eyebrow. How's your back? Before he could answer, my mentor, Judge Foster, walked up. There's my star student. Ready to start at the firm next week? Henry's face dropped. You already have a job? Top firm in the city, Foster said proudly. I recommended her myself. Henry's mouth opened and closed like a fish. How fortunate, he finally muttered. 1 week later, I walked into my new law firm. Armed with a new briefcase. Armed with determination. And, as fate would have it, armed with a very interesting piece of news. Melissa, Naomi whispered at lunch. Guess who just applied for a job here? I blinked. No. Oh, yes. She slid me a copy of the application. Henry Clark. The man who had spent years mocking working mothers. The man who had convinced my kids I was dumb. Now? He needed me to sign off on his employment. I closed the folder slowly. Tell him to come in Monday for an interview. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You're really going to consider him? I smiled. I believe in second chances. I just want to see if he can handle earning one. Mr. Clark is here for his interview, my assistant announced through the intercom. Send him to conference room B, I replied smoothly. And have Damien handle the initial interview. I watched through the one-way glass as Henry entered the room. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his usual confident stride replaced with something far more hesitant. Mr. Clark, Damien greeted him coolly. Please, have a seat. Henry lowered himself into the chair stiffly. Thank you for seeing me, he said, his voice lacking its usual authority. I understand you're hiring for a compliance officer position? Yes, for our new division, Damien replied, flipping through Henry's resume. The director is very particular about who we hire. Henry straightened. I assure you, I have extensive experience overseeing financial matters. My years managing large charitable organizations. I see that, Damien cut in. But have you ever worked directly in a corporate environment? Henry hesitated. Well, no, but... Professional experience? I've managed high-profile events, worked with investors, and advised on financial strategy. Paid positions? Henry's mouth snapped shut. Damien made a note. This role requires proficiency with modern financial software. Are you comfortable using spreadsheets, compliance databases, and regulatory reporting tools? Henry forced a smile. I use email. I nearly choked on my coffee. Damien kept his expression neutral. We'll also need professional references. Any former employers? Well, I was on the board of the Heritage Club. Not a paid position, Damien reminded him. Henry shifted uncomfortably. I can provide character references. We require professional ones, Damien said. Then, almost as an afterthought, though I understand you've had some financial difficulties recently? Henry's face darkened. My financial situation is private, he muttered. Not when you're seeking employment, Damien countered. We conduct full background checks, including credit histories. Henry's hands clenched on the table. I see. Actually, Damien said, closing the folder, the director specifically requested to meet you. She'll be joining us shortly. Henry exhaled in relief. Clearly, he thought his connections might still save him. Oh, Henry. If only you knew. I gave them another 5 minutes before stepping inside. Henry's back was to me, but I saw his shoulders stiffen as my heels clicked across the floor. Mr. Clark, I said smoothly. What a surprise. He turned, his face draining of color. Melissa, he breathed. That's Director Quinn here, Damien corrected, barely concealing his smirk. Henry swallowed. This is your division? Newly appointed, I confirmed, taking a seat across from him. Damien, would you give us a moment? Once we were alone, I opened Henry's file. "So," I said, "you're interested in working for us." He looked at me warily. "If I had known. You wouldn't have applied," I finished for him. "I figured." His jaw tensed. "Are you enjoying this?" "Actually, no," I said, lacing my fingers together. "What I would enjoy is seeing if you can handle something you've spent your entire life avoiding, earning your place." Henry's face twitched, but he said nothing. "You need this job," I continued. "Your financial situation is dire. Your investments tanked. Your debts are piling up. The country club revoked your membership." "That's enough," he snapped. I tilted my head. "Is it? Because for years, you made me feel less than. You convinced my children that I was incompetent. That my work, my contributions, weren't worth respect." Henry looked away. "And now," I said, voice softening just enough, "you're sitting in front of me, needing the very thing you mocked. A job. A chance." His throat bobbed. "So, tell me, Henry, why should I hire you?" Silence stretched between us. He exhaled. I'm a hard worker." "Are you?" His jaw tightened. "I know financial structures inside and out. I have experience handling budgets and ensuring compliance with regulations." "You have experience supervising people who did those things," I corrected. "This job requires doing the work. Not delegating it." Henry flinched. "But I'm willing to learn," he said, quieter this time. "I can adapt." I studied him. "Can you?" For the first time, Henry looked uncertain. I let the moment stretch before picking up my pen. "Fine. You can start on a probationary basis. You'll receive the same salary and benefits as any other compliance officer. No special treatment. No exceptions." Henry exhaled in relief. "Thank you." "Oh, and Henry?" I added sweetly. He looked up warily. "Your direct supervisor will be Damien." Henry visibly clenched his teeth. I smiled. "Welcome to corporate life." "You're late, Mr. Clark." Henry strode into the office at 8:15 a.m., flustered. Traffic was terrible. "Everyone else manages to arrive on time," Damien cut in. Henry's jaw worked, but he said nothing. "Here's today's workload," Damien continued, dropping a thick stack of folders onto Henry's desk. "I need the financial reports cross-checked by noon, and Melissa, Director Quinn, needs the regulatory analysis done before 2. Henry hesitated. "That's a lot for one morning." "Then you should probably get started," Damien said brightly. Henry muttered something under his breath but sat down to work. From my office, I watched the scene unfold. Henry was struggling. And I had zero sympathy. Later that afternoon, Naomi knocked on my door. "We have a situation," she said. I sighed. "What now?" Henry made an intern cry. I closed my eyes briefly. "Send them both in. Separately." 20 minutes later, Henry stood in front of me. "Sit," I instructed. He obeyed, looking less like the arrogant man I once knew and more like someone who realized he'd made a series of very poor life choices. "Let me be clear," I said. "This is your last warning." Henry looked away. "No excuses," I interrupted. "You will treat your coworkers with respect. You will complete your assignments on time. And if you can't manage that, you will be fired." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand," he muttered. "Good," I said, standing. "Now get back to work." That night, as I recounted the day to Eric, he raised an eyebrow. "You really gave him another chance?" "I don't believe in kicking people when they're down," I said, sipping my wine. "And yet," Eric smirked, "you're making sure he works for every inch of his redemption." I grinned. "Success isn't about revenge, Eric." No, I said, stretching. "But that doesn't mean I can't enjoy it." I sat in my office, waiting. Right on cue, there was a knock at the door. "Come in." The door opened, and Henry Clark walked in, his usual arrogance dulled by the weight of desperation. His once flawless suits had been replaced by something more practical, the kind of off-the-rack outfit that screamed "I can't afford my tailor anymore." I didn't stand. Didn't offer a handshake. Instead, I gestured to the chair across from me. "Mr. Clark, please have a seat." His jaw tightened at the formal address, but he obeyed. "Melissa, That's Ms. Carter in this office." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he masked it. "Of course. Ms. Carter." I picked up his resume. "So, you're applying for an administrative position. Office support, filing, scheduling, data entry. Is that correct?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes. You have no prior experience in this field." He swallowed. "I managed several charity events, oversaw finances, coordinated staff." "Paid positions?" I interrupted. He hesitated. "No." "Computer proficiency?" I continued. "I use email," he admitted, clearing his throat. I set down his resume and folded my hands. "Mr. Clark, you do realize that this position requires answering phones, scheduling meetings, and maintaining spreadsheets?" His grip on the chair's arm tightened. "I can learn," he said, voice tight. "Are you willing to be trained by younger employees?" Silence. His jaw flexed. "I suppose I'll have to be." I let the words hang in the air. "Well," I said finally, standing. "Thank you for coming in. I'll be in touch with our decision." I extended my hand. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. His pride was screaming. But he took it. And for the first time ever, I saw something in Henry Clark that had never been there before. Humility. Henry sat stiffly at his new desk, typing awkwardly with 2 fingers while his much younger supervisor, Olivia, walked him through basic office software. "Try right-clicking, Mr. Clark," she said patiently. "I am right-clicking." "No, that's left-clicking." "The right button, sir." I passed by, hiding my smirk. "How's the training going?" I asked. Olivia smiled. "He's learning." Henry said nothing. He wasn't used to this, to being the least experienced person in the room. To being the one needing help. He wasn't taking it well. And that? That was exactly why I had hired him. "Melissa." "Ms. Carter," I corrected. Henry sighed, shifting in his chair. Ms. Carter, he exhaled. "I need an advance on my paycheck." I leaned back. "I'm afraid that's not company policy, Mr. Clark." His nostrils flared. "Melissa, please. Didn't you once say," I mused, "that people who can't manage their finances shouldn't be trusted with real responsibility?" His face darkened. That was different. Was it? He swallowed hard. I let the silence stretch. Then, finally, he exhaled. "I was wrong." I raised an eyebrow. "I was wrong about you," he clarified. "About a lot of things." I nodded. "I know." He hesitated. "Anne. I'm sorry." It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them. Like a man who had spent years walking on marble floors and now realized how cold they felt beneath his knees. I studied him. Then, I slid a resource packet across the desk. "Financial Planning Workshop. Free for employees. I suggest you attend." He blinked at the paper. "You're not going to lecture me?" Why would I? I shrugged. "You're figuring it out the hard way, just like the rest of us did." He let out a breath that sounded suspiciously close to relief. He took the paper. "Thank you." And for the first time, he actually meant it. "Mom, can you help me with my college essay?" I looked up from my case files. Ethan stood in the doorway, papers in hand. "Of course, sweetheart." "What's it about?" "I want to write about what inspired me to pursue law," he said. "Guess who?" Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Henry entered, carrying compliance reports. His expensive suits were long gone, replaced with practical business attire. A man who had learned that status was fleeting. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, setting the files down. "Perfect timing," I said. "Ethan's working on his college essay." Henry's face softened. "Following in your mother's footsteps?" "And Dad's," Ethan added. "But mostly Mom's." Henry smiled. "She showed me it's never too late to start over," Ethan continued. Henry's eyes welled up. She showed all of us that. And for the first time ever, there was real respect in his gaze. The real victory? I had nothing left to prove.